pinned or with arrows is that point. Okay, if we are looking at the external nares in this direction, almost all that we see there is perpendicular plane of the ethmoid. Only this bottom point here is vomer. It's like I'm looking through this hole right here, external nares. Only that bottom point is vomer. The rest of that is perpendicular plane of the ethmoid. Everybody see that? So this is almost all perpendicular plane of the ethmoid, except for this point.
What was the purple meaning?
What's that?
What was the purple?
Middle cranial, middle nasal concha. This is what the cribriform plate looks like in the articulated skull. Again, about 20 holes on each side. And the vomer just looks like a wedge. That point that you can see from the anterior, that's this point. It's just a plate because it's the inferior nasal septum. That's the V in the middle of the whiteboard. Most of it's perpendicular plate, the bottom is the vomer. So when you look at it from the internal nares, this is why I drew it like this. Like this view here, you're seeing all vomer. This is all vomer. All vomer this way. Only the bottom point is vomer this way. The rest of it is perpendicular plane of the ethmoid. Everybody see what I drew on the whiteboard? All right, let's go to the mandible. I'm going to not do this in order. The arrows came out in order, but I'm not going to do it in order. All right. And right here in the mandible it says ramus and body. That's two different things. You got to do A and B on ramus and body as well. Because the horizontal part of the mandible is the body, here in purple, but the vertical part of the mandible here in blue is the ramus. They're not the same. They meet at what is called the angle, but that's not on your best friend. There's actually 3 regions of the mandible, but you only have 2. Now, if you look at the ramus, it's a projection that is angled like this. And it looks like an angled capital Y, doesn't it? The anterior arm of the Y is the coronoid process, there in orange. You have to say coronoid process of the mandible. Look on the bottom of page 7. Middle thing in the ulna. What is that? Coronoid. Yeah. And that you have to say coronoid process of the ulna. Everybody remember that? Do you guys know what coronoid means? Like coronation? Crown. What they said when they looked at that, they thought, oh, you know, that looks like one of the points of a crown. You put it in a ring, you put it on top of your head. It's like a crown. That's why they call it that. Same thing for the point that's on the ulna. Yes?
To be safe during the exam, you know, whenever we name a point, if we put whether you deduct the point or?
I won't, but the more you spell, the more you risk misspelling. So there's only a few that you have to say of the. This is one of them, coronoid process of the mandible. The posterior arm in green is the condylar process in green. But the yellow at the very tip is the mandibular condyle, for which the condylar process is named. And that is the M of the TMJ. What would be the ball going into the mandibular fossa socket? Everybody got it? Way to understand it, my forearm is the condylar process, but my fist is the mandibular condyle. Does that make sense? The forearm is the green arrow, my fist is the yellow arrow. Does that help? Also scratch off head of the mandible.
Okay.
Scratch off head of the mandible. Your textbooks and other academics will use that, but nobody in clinical practices calls it the head of the mandible. It's mandibular condyle. Whether you're ear, nose, and throat medicine, or in any field of dentistry, it's mandibular condyle. Everybody got these? Notice that the lateral side of the ramus is really smooth. Okay? Again, because it holds teeth, the mandible has alveolar process. There in 3. And whoever had this mandible, I don't think ever brushed his teeth. Oh, I have horror stories. Okay, now this is the medial side of the ramus. Notice it isn't smooth, it's got a hole there. And that hole is the mandibular foramen. Okay, I'll give you a little clinical history since I know something about this. When you pick up a maxilla, it's really light. And it's really light is because the cortical bone, the compact bone, is an eggshell. It's just an eggshell in this. And so all I had to do to numb an upper tooth is just put a ball of anesthetic outside the maxilla and it seeps through the eggshell. And the teeth get numb. You can't miss upper injections. But if you pick up a mandible, it is way heavier. And that's because the cortical plate is way thicker. You could put balls of anesthetic around this all day. It's not going to go through that thick plate. Does this make sense? So what you do is you go back here from the opposite bicuspids, shoot for this landmark called the medium raphe, keep it above the plane of the teeth so that you're above this hole that's on the screen, and you got to go in over a ½ inch, probably closer to 3/4 of an inch to get to that. And your goal here is to put a ball up anesthetic right here where this black arrow is. And everything distal to it is going to run into that ball of anesthetic. So anything along these teeth is going to come up here, boom, and stop there and never get to your brain. That's why it's called a mandibular block. Okay? And the nerve that goes in that hole comes out the mental foramen. Right there. So I can ask mental foramen articulated as well as disarticulated mandible. But when that nerve comes out of the mental foramen, it makes your corner or your lower lip numb. And so if you're going to get some work done over here on the bottom left, they're going to give you that mandibular block and say, "Does your lip feel bad?" Yes, it does. Well, then you know you have a block. Does that make sense? Okay, this is how to use critical thinking in healthcare. And it could be at the most simple elemental level. If somebody has got a fat lip and can't feel this, you have a block. If you start working and all of a sudden the person goes, "Oh, I feel that," you think you should just give another block? You already have a good block. You're just doing it because you're chicken. And because you know they're not going to feel another shot because they're already numb there. But that's not going to help anything. You already have a good block. And that's why everybody is different. And some people can actually get nerves coming up from the neck that'll penetrate below the border of the mandible and supply these back teeth. That's what you got to go for. Just giving another block is stupid. You already have a block. Does this make sense? Black arrow is alveolar process. Orange arrow is mental foramen. Hyoid bone is the only bone that doesn't articulate like another bone. It floats in your neck. So like in this skeleton, they had this suspended by a couple of wires because it floats in your neck. It's approximately where the vertical part of your neck meets the horizontal going to your chin. That's about where the hyoid bone is. Okay? These are sutural bones, but hold off on sutural bones here. And we're gonna skip some things and come back. Go all the way to sutures. I gotta erase this, so if you don't have this, please get it now, because I gotta erase it. Everybody got it?
Is it sutural? Worm?
Or wormian.
Okay.
I'll get to that later. All right.
Oh.
The parietal bone is really indistinct. It's just the only bone that's entirely flat bone. All the other flat bones in the cranium are only partially flat bones. But the parietal bone is entirely flat. It's the superior cranial bone. And if you actually think about it, it's like a rectangle. But if you, unless you have a blockhead, it's not going to be a rectangle. It's going to look like this. But like a rectangle, it has 4 sides. So if you take the picture that's on the screen and turn it upside down, doesn't it kind of look like what I drew?
Yeah.
Well, like a rectangle that has 4 sides, you have 4 sutures. The sagittal suture, and this is how I would draw this. Is not only draw the suture, but draw what's on the other side. And on the other side of the sagittal suture is the other parietal bone. Because you have 2, one on the left and one on the right. Okay, so in the mid-sagittal plane. The coronal suture here in purple, so let's call this anterior. This posterior. On the anterior side, you have the coronal suture. Planes. And on the other side of the coronal suture is the frontal bone. A lot of these notes that I would make as a student just helped me to connect some dots. And the more dots I connected, the more I understood. And the more I understood, the less I had to memorize. There it is again. Frontal suture, you can see on the other side of that is the frontal bone. There are 4 named parts of the temporal bone. None of them are on your best friend. They do have to know the 4 parts requested. And this area of the temporal bone, the part that is flat bone, they name the same word for the flat epithelial cells. What are flat epithelial cells called? Squamous. This is the squamous part of the temporal bone. Well, unfortunately, it's not in your best friend, so this name may not hardly make any sense. But this border is the squamous suture. And on the other side, it's the squamous part of the temporal bone. And that's that green arrow. Then on the posterior, because it's shaped like the lambda, that's sagittal suture on the midline, but it's shaped in these angles like the lambda letter is a lambdoid suture in orange. You got one right, left, and on the other side of the lambdoid suture is occipital bone. So this is anterior, this is a left parietal bone. Okay, Okay? All right, now let's go back. Sutural bones are extra bones in any of these four sutures. So this is actually lambdoid suture. These are sutural bones in the lambdoid suture. Up there is a sutural bone in the squamous suture. Everybody see that? This is also the reason why nobody has 206 bones. Because some of you have sutural bones. There are extra bones that's going to increase your number. Everybody got it? Now does the name sutural bones make sense? They are found in these guys. Okay?
So all three of those bottom ones are the same one, you're just showing?
You just call them sutural bones.
Okay.
I can pin any of these. This one, there's another one. There's another one.
So even the top one is a sutural bone?
Up here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We wouldn't say it's the squamous suture.
Oh, no, if I want suture, it's gonna be obvious. If I want sutural bones, it's gonna be obvious.
Okay, so just sutural bones for all of those?
Any of them, yeah. You don't have to name them.
Okay.
Okay, we did all the sutures. Now let's go back to the temporal bone. We did parietal, we know where it's located, right? Right? Temporal bones, this is the left temporal bone articulated. This is the right temporal bone disarticulated. In orange is the zygomatic process. It's making up about 3/4 of the zygomatic arch. So zygomatic process and zygomatic arch are two different things. The zygomatic process is only 2/3 or 3/4
And
of the
that's
zygomatic arch.
arch.
This is the process, because it's not the whole thing.
If-
The zygomatic process is just the portion of the zygomatic arch on the temporal bone. On the zygomatic bone, they call it the temporal process of the zygomatic bone, and that's the other third of the 30%. Okay? All right. In yellow is the mastoid process. In green, like a needle, like a record player's stylus, is the styloid process of the temporal bone. This is one you have to say of the temporal bone. Look on the bottom of page 7. Very bottom of page 7. What do you see down there? Styloid process of the radius, styloid process of the ulna, this green is styloid process of the temporal bone. Styloid is easy, it's needle-like. But how about mastoid? Does anybody know what the root word is for mastoid process, like in mastectomy? Yeah, it's telling you that all the original anatomists were men. And they saw this round, droopy, bony lump on the temporal bone, and they go, "Oh, that looks like my wife's boob. Well, let's just call her mastoid process." It has nothing to do with lactation. Oh, there's things on the brain too. External, auditory, or acoustic meatus and blue. Hold the bone, it's meatus.
External or internal?
This is external,
Okay,
because it's on the lateral view.
thank you.
However, here, you need to draw your own arrow. I don't have an arrow on there. Here's that bony ridge. Well, it's different now, but it was a sausage over here. That's the internal auditory meatus. So draw an arrow to this hole and fill that in as internal auditory meatus. I can ask either on a disarticulated temporal bone.
We
See
just
that?
always get rid of canal, right?
What's that?
Just always get rid of canal?
Not until we get to the ear.
Oh, great.
When we get to the ear, it's canal, because then you'll see skin and soft tissue on it. Canal is skin and soft tissue. meatus, foramen is holding the bone.
Okay.
For example, we looked at the orbit, the nasolacrimal foramen. Well, inside of that is the soft tissue nasolacrimal canal going through the foramen. Okay. Everybody draw that arrow to that hole? Here's the articulated carotid canals and the articulated skull. But here it is in a disarticulated temporal bone. Carotid canal, I can ask it both. Okay, everybody got that? All right, we're almost done with page 10. Everybody look at this picture. Let this shape burn into your eyes. Everybody see the shape? Everybody see it? You see it here? Now you know the location. When somebody says they broke their nose, most oftentimes it's this plate. Either it gets broken or it gets dislocated. Okay, everybody got it?
And that's just nasals?
Those are the nasal bones. All right, this is the lacrimal bone. It's a little bit more irregularly shaped. It contributes to the orbit. How many bones do you think contribute to the orbit? Anybody want to guess? Just take a guess. 7. Should put money on it. All right, this is one of them. Lacrimal gland contributes to the orbit just barely because this is, you see this kind of lighter rim right here? This is like a ridge that goes right across the middle. Everybody see that ridge? Everybody see that ridge? That's where the lacrimal bone is. It only forms part of the nasal lacrimal foramen, not the whole thing. You're not going to see a whole hole in the lacrimal bone. It's really only forming the medial anterior wall of the nasal lacrimal foramen. Okay, here's the maxilla. So we're now on top of page 11. We're getting there. This is the largest of the paranasal sinuses. There are 4 of them. This is the largest, the maxillary sinus. You might hear it be called the antrum. Another name for it. It's huge. In fact, in some people, the floor of this can drop all the way down and wrap itself around the roots of the molars and even the second bicuspid. To the point that there's only an eggshell between the sinus and the root of the tooth. Just an eggshell. But the bone that holds the roots of the teeth is the alveolar process. Making up a good portion of the bony hard palate is the palatine process there in blue. Everybody got these? And there's the palatine process there in an inferior view. Do you see the 90-degree angle?
Yes.
We've seen it before, haven't we? Everybody look at that 90-degree angle. Everybody see the 90-degree angle right here? Everybody see the 90-degree angle right here? That's because the suture lines form a cross, upside down cross in the bony hard palate. 4 bones. Oh, go back to this. Do you want to hear another tale of critical thinking, clinical critical thinking, or do you want to just do the arrows? Okay, this actually happened to me probably about a half dozen times while I was practicing. Guy comes in, because, this lower right here really hurts. It kept me up all night, which, by the way, you know is legitimate pain. But legitimate pain will keep you up all night. You know, if somebody's saying, oh man, I've never had a pain this bad ever. And you go, well, how'd you sleep last night? You say, oh, not too bad. You're a crybaby. You know if it's real pain because it kept you up all night. And this tooth right here, it's this tooth. I think I need a root canal right here because I'm tired of the pain. All right, let me check it out. So I check it out, nothing wrong with the tooth. Take an x-ray, nothing wrong with the tooth. What do you do? You go back to your anatomy and physiology, more specifically embryology and how we develop. And when the nervous system is developing, it's actually branched between upper and lower jaws, coming out of the brain, and it branches off and they develop together, which is very similar to what happens to some of the nerves that go to your heart and to your arms. Which is why when someone has a heart attack, oftentimes they're saying, I got this pain in my left arm. It's referred pain. Everybody got it? So if there's nothing wrong with the lower tooth, I better look at the upper tooth. Referred pain only goes up and down, never goes left or right. So I check up the upper tooth. Nothing wrong with the upper tooth. Take an x-ray of it. Nothing wrong with the upper tooth except when you look at the maxillary sinus, it is wrapping itself around the molar. And going, well, I don't think this is dental. Hey, get up out of the chair and bend over and touch your toes. Why would I do that? Because also in education, you learn that our bodies are glorified bags of fluid. And what is the one plumbing principle all plumbers need to know? Someone, you've heard this. Plumbing principle. Come on. Nobody's heard shit rolls downhill? That's the only thing you gotta know. Shit rolls downhill. Which means right now as I'm standing here, the blood pressure in my head is low compared to the blood pressure in my feet. Because shit rolls downhill. You go like this, and all of a sudden the blood in your trunk goes into your head, increasing the pressure. And without doing any MRIs or any extensive scans, all of a sudden the guy goes, oh, hey, now it's really hurting. Doc, what did you do? I saved you $3,000, dumbass. Because it had nothing to do with your teeth. You got a sinus infection. And the pressure on that thing is pressing on the nerves going into the upper tooth, and it's referring to the lower tooth. Go get your sinus infection fixed, and your pain will go away. And now I got a guy who actually trusts me. You understand?
Yes.
Not everyone does critical thinking, even with letters after the name. There's plenty of people when a guy goes in, Doc, I think I need a root canal. Goes cha-ching, does root canal. And then make some money, temporarily, until they're sued. Because that pain isn't gonna go away. Because that was not the thing that caused it. Does that make sense? So even though we're learning and memorizing a lot of things now, it's background for you to use critical thinking later. Does that make sense? Because if you're going into healthcare for the cha-ching, you need to do something else. Okay. Again, maxilla has alveolar process, and now this is also telling you I can ask infraorbital foramen on the articulated skull or the disarticulated maxilla, because there it is right there in blue. Infraorbital, one word.
Infraorbital.
You can see the maxilla forms the floor of the orbits, can't you? It's one of the seven. So is the zygomatic bone. It forms a lateral wall of the orbits. So you see the orbit hole right there, the round arc? It's there. It's the lateral wall of the orbits. It's also the point of your cheekbones. That's zygomatic bone. Inferior nasal concha, again, it's its own bone. There it is right there. Middle nasal concha is up here in the shadow, part of the ethmoid bone. Green arrows on the inferior ones, its own bone. Palatine bones look like a capital L. It has a vertical part and a horizontal part. Oh, believe it or not, the palatine bones actually is one of the 7. The upper point actually is called the orbital surface. It's one of the 7. Where the vertical part meets the horizontal part, you have some foramina. The anterior ones are the greater palatine foramen. The posterior ones are the lesser palatine foramen. You can have one of each, or you can have multiples of each. Again, highly variable. So blue is greater, purple is lesser. All right, let's do the fontanelles. Now the fontanelles, and there's 2 ways you can spell fontanelles. You can spell like on page 11, or you can take off the last LE. There's 2 ways to spell it correctly. What we're going to talk about on Tuesday in lecture is 2 ways that bones form, osteogenesis. And one of them is intramembranous ossification, and flat bones are a great illustration of this. It starts out in the middle, and then it radiates out. Everybody got it? Well, the problem is that the parietal bone is a rectangle, and this bone growth is circular. And when you start getting to be full term, pretty soon you got something that looks like this. And you got this area here that is not bone, only in the circle is it bone. You got this corner. You got this corner. And in the 4 corners of the rectangle, you got soft spots that are not bone, just before birth. Those are the fontanelles. And so if we think of the sutures as being the 4 borders of the rectangle, the fontanelles are the 4 corners. Does this make sense? If you look at this, you can see how you start out with 2 frontal bones. Can you see that? And it actually fuses. But this one here, the largest of them, is the anterior fontanelle. I'm going to just use abbreviations here. Anterior fontanelle, you can also call frontal. There it is on top. You can see how these plates are just radiating circles, aren't they? And in the corners, it can't be bone yet. That's also the anterior. This is the posterior fontanelle. Over here is actually the lateral side of the greater wing of the sphenoid bone. So this is the sphenoid fontanelle. And over here where the mastoid process is eventually going to develop is the mastoid fontanelle. That's mastoid fontanelle, not what you might think that means. Any questions? What's really sad about this skull, this particular one, is these fontanelles are actually almost closed. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. This isn't a field skull. But people get upset if you write on the box, neonatal skull. This is a baby that died early in life. Because there's no way you can do childbirth with soft spots that small. Everybody got it? This is also the reason why we have fontanelles, not only because of this growing circle of intramembranous ossification, but this allows the skull to change shape during childbirth. There's no way the skull's going through the birth canal that way. Does this make sense? That's why babies get born, you know, their head looks like a bratwurst. You can thank the fontanelles. All right, let's continue on with the vertebral column. This slide is and the very first few slides are on the stereotypical vertebra. Stereotypical vertebra. What you want to write next to this section is I will always put the posterior on top. Posterior is always on top. The most posterior part of the vertebra is the spine. And the spine is the tips of the spinous processes. They're in blue. Spinous process. So it's on top, that's the posterior. The yellow dashed line is the vertebral arch. You can also call it the neural arch. Those are synonyms. But this hole, the whole hole, is called a vertebral foramen. You guys remember gray matter, white matter, the gray butterfly? That's right where it is, where that arrowhead is. All right, now we're going to get more specific, and it always helped me to tie together certain things to understand this. The flat plates on the back side of the vertebral foramen, they're in orange. That is the laminas.
All of them?
Both of them.
Both of them?
Yep, there's two laminas.
That red and orange looks similar, so.
Yeah, the orange up on top.
Okay.
Because you see how it's flat?
Uh-huh.
Like when we've done the surgical nervous system extractions, we actually cut right here and take the whole posterior off to get access to the spinal cord. That's called a laminectomy. We're cutting the ones on top. The two reds on the bottom, those are the bony struts coming off the centrum or body. Those are pedicles. But if you go back to that dashed yellow line, you have two laminas, actually it's laminae, plus two pedicles equals vertebral arch, the dashed yellow line. Is this whole thing. Boom. Okay. The body or centrum is this in purple. But if you take the vertebral arch, blue one, and add the posterior wall of the body, that gets you the vertebral foramen. The whole hole. Okay? So the two orange and the two red equals that yellow. That yellow plus the posterior wall of the body is this green. Everybody following my thinking here?
Yes.
Okay. Now these plates pointing up, going to the next vertebra, are the superior articular processes in blue. If they're pointing up, this is a superior articular process for this vertebra. This is a superior articular process for that vertebra. Everybody got it? If they point down, they're inferior articular processes in orange. This is the one for this vertebra, this is the one for this vertebra. Going down is inferior articular processes, going up in blue, superior articular processes. Now it's really easy when you're twerking your back for this thing to flip over on the other side. Happens all the time. And when that happens, that is one of the legitimate things a chiropractor can do to help you. Just put it back on the right side. Everybody got it? Any questions? I got nothing against chiropractors. I have friends that are chiropractors. If I worked as hard as I did to get my degree toward chiropractor, I can get my doctorate in 4 years. If I work equally hard. And I'm just sorry. But none of us who have MDs or DDSs really think you should be called doctor in 4 years. But this is one thing that chiropractic can legitimately use. Any questions? All right, now we got to talk about the facets. Are you curious about the facets? This is the easiest way for me to explain it. So listen. If my left hand is number 160, superior articular process there, in blue, and my right hand is the inferior articular process from the one above. Are you following me? The whole hand is the process, but the palms, where they are rubbing, are the facets. Everybody got it? The whole hand is the process, but the flat spots where it's rubbing against the adjacent one, when you're doing this, are the facets, where they're touching. So this is a superior view looking down. That whole bony strut coming out are the superior articular processes. But this flat side is the palm, superior articular facets in yellow. Facets are more specific. It is just one side of the process. The whole bony strut is the process. The one side that's flat is the facet. Is there any? Do I have to keep saying that? Can I stop saying that? To the lateral or the transverse processes in green. Ooh, we're getting close. We're not gonna break anymore. I'm gonna finish it, right?
So both of those are the transverse?
Yep, right and left.
Do we need to know our right from left?
Nope. Right and left is only for the appendicular skeleton. Did everybody hear that?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
All right, now we gotta talk about the different regions of the vertebral column. And there are 5. What you wanna be looking for are the distinguishing features. See how we have on the left is the hyoid bone, that's not part of the vertebral column. Cervical vertebrae are the only vertebrae that have these. So this is distinctive of cervical vertebrae, and there's 7. And these are foramen and the transverse process. We call transverse foramen. Only the 7 cervical vertebrae have them. You don't have to know the name or number of the vertebrae except the top 2. After that, you just got to be able to place this as a cervical vertebra because of these guys. Everybody got it? The top 2 are C1 atlas. C1 is the number, atlas is the name. You can tell that C means cervical because there in green are the transverse foramen. C1 atlas is the only vertebra that doesn't have a body. But can you see an upside down Mickey Mouse? Now you know what it articulates with, the occipital bone. But no body. This is the only vertebra that doesn't have a body. Here's a C2 axis. And the axis is a bony strut that you rotate around when you do this. And because of that, it acts like an axle. That's why they named C2 the axis. Everybody got it? The axis is actually called the dens. That's the blue arrow, dens. And the dens is the beginning of the vertebral bodies. So you see the bony strut sticking up here? That's dens. Boom. On the other side of it is the beginning of the bodies. Everybody got it? And like all cervical vertebrae, they do have transverse foramen, just a little bit harder to see on the axis. Now blue is dens, green is transverse foramen.
What's the blue?
Dens,
Then? Oh.
which is the axle. Okay, thoracic vertebra are the only vertebra with rib articulations. And there's 12 of them. The rib articulations is going to be on the side of the body and then on the end of the transverse process. Side of the body, end of the transverse process. And the reason why you have two is because of this. Side of the body, end of the transverse process. Is anybody curious as to what are rib facets or demifacets? Demi and hemi means half. And all the ribs, starting at the top, actually head for the intervertebral disc. And so they articulate with the bodies of the vertebrae at the corners, being split in half. If the articulations are split in half, that is a demifacet. When you get to the floating ribs, they actually do head straight for the body. That's a full rib facet. Or costal facet, same thing. So it's either full rib facet or split in half demifacet. Does that make sense? Are you guys like getting burnt out on this? You guys want to figure the rest of this out on your own?
No.
Some people are practicing, yeah. All right, lumbar, large, and they lack those distinguishing features. Large and they lack the distinguishing features. And that's what you got to go with, because guess what? T12 looks just like this. The only difference is T12 has a rib facet. But just don't go with large, because T12 looks just like this. Sacrum is large and fused, 5 vertebra. Coccyx is small and fused, only 4. This is your tailbone. I hope the guy you can't wag it. All right. This is how they come together. All right, let's go to the sternum. There are 3 bones. The superior bone is the manubrium. The largest one is the body.
Can you say the first one more time?
Manubrium,
Did you say body of?
body of the sternum. Is everybody on sternum now? Xiphoid process is the tiny little point at the bottom, which you want to avoid if you're doing chest compressions. That's the purple arrow. But body is in the middle, manubrium there is on top. What's that? Xiphoid process. What's that? Did you say cricoid? That's in your larynx. It is it is a hyaline cartilage ring, and it's the only hyaline cartilage ring that is 360 degrees around. And so if somebody inhales food and tends to get caught, cricoid cartilage, and then that's what we need to do. Everybody got these three? So that's why you're supposed to, if you can do chest compressions, you gotta feel for the xanthoid process. Put 3 fingers, go on top of it, now you're fine. You know, when you're doing chest compressions, you're gonna crack hyaline cartilage, you might crack a rib. And that person can't sue you because the only other option is the person dies. So it's okay to get a couple of cracked ribs. Everybody got it? You crack the xanthoid process, yeah, and then they can sue you because you should have known to stay out. Does that make sense? All right, ribs. Here we go. You want to change rib numbers here. True ribs are 1 through 5. False ribs are 6 through 12. Because here's the definition. True ribs have their own individual hyaline cartilage. Costal cartilage, this is a synchondrosis. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Just these first 5 have their own individual hyaline cartilage articulations of the sternum. These are the true ribs. Everything after that is false. 6 through 10 share 1. That's a false rib. 11 and 12 are also false ribs, but they are called floating ribs because they lack hyaline cartilage articulations. They're just floating. 6 through 10 all share 1, false ribs. 11 and 12 are also false ribs, but they are specifically floating ribs. So blue is true, red is false, orange is false floating. There's another one in the shadow down here too, that's number 12. Okay? All right, now I already told you already, and I'm gonna go over Lab Exam 1 next week. Lab Exam 1 is in 2 weeks. So it's not next week, it's the following week. So next week I'll go specifically over Lab Exam 1. I already told you though, stations 1 and 2 are microscopic, stations 3 and 4 are long bone. Stations 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, sometimes 10 are appendicular bones where you have to tell me right from left, right? Stations 25, back there, will be this. Everybody got it? What you want to write next to this on page 12 is the fibula is lateral. I know you know that already, but this is a good time to be reminded. Fibula is lateral. Well, if the fibula is over here and it's lateral, this must be the medial meniscus in red, because it's on the other side. And in orange, that must be the lateral meniscus, because it's by the fibula. This is an anterior view. You can tell it's anterior because here's the patella peeled away. So if that's anterior, that must be the ACL, anterior cruciate ligament. Everybody should write this down, by the way. For the last 5 on the bottom of page 12, you need to add the word ligament. It is ACL, not AC. Anterior cruciate ligament. You need the 3rd word. The posterior view, we can see the PCL, posterior cruciate ligament in blue. Here I don't see a fibula, so this must be the medial. Number 6 must be the medial collateral ligament. You can also call it the tibial collateral ligament. But this one is going to the head of the fibula, so this must be the lateral collateral ligament. You can also call it the fibular collateral ligament. And finally, lastly, this is anterior to the ACL. The ACL is behind it. This is the transverse ligament in red. You actually saw it before. I don't know if you noticed it. But there it is right there. This is the ACL behind it. Number 12 is the transverse ligament. Everybody see how those are two different ligaments? Okay? Boom. We covered it. You guys did good. Alicia LaGrange, are you here?